Hey, how's it going? In this video, we, along with Honey, are going to teach you how to teach someone how to pivot. And basically we're going to break this up into 3 different components. The first component is like, what are the mechanics? How do you perform the pivot? The second component is what is the timing? How do we time it out so it has that snap and intensity, and we're showing that to our audience or to our judges. And the third thing is like, what exercises can we do to help our people learn how to perform the pivot the way that we want them to. Now, when we're teaching the pivot, obviously we want to start by showing them what a really great pivot looks like. And not just because we're supposed to demonstrate, talk through, walk through. We want to show them because a really well executed pivot, and check out our video on pivoting and work through it yourself if you're not quite there, a really great pivot is really impressive. I think when we go and we teach a new group especially, or new drillers especially, and we show them, it's like, hey, pop, boom, we show them that snap and that break in the shoulders, like, wow. And so that's going to give them a picture of what they're working towards. But not only that, it's going to give them the idea that by the time they're done, because they're going to get pretty close to that by the time they're done, it's like, wow, I actually accomplished something, and I did something that I think maybe I thought I couldn't do or couldn't do at that level. So really starting off by showing and demonstrating what that great pivot looks like, and so make sure that we're practicing that yourself so you're ready to roll into it with confidence. Then, once we've kind of demonstrated what that pivot looks like, the next thing we have to do is break down what's actually going on in the pivot itself, because they have to understand kind of what the components are that they're about to execute. And I think there's really 2 different parts to this. One is the things leading up to the pivot, and the second piece of the puzzle is what's happening when we actually turn the corner and go left or go right, 45, whatever we're doing. So we're going to start with what's happening leading up to that pivot. At this point, we assume that you've taught them their basic position of intention, their body alignment. Make sure you check out those videos if you haven't already. We assume that you've taught them how to march, and they are familiar with some of the basics there, stepping 1 foot right in front of the other, their posture and their weight and all that kind of stuff, arm swing. And at this point, we're probably ready to talk about like what happens when we hear left flank march by the left flank, by the right flank. We're going to demonstrate what goes into it. So the first thing we would do is we would have them march a number of steps forward, and we would teach them how to freeze in the middle of a step, right? So we could say we're going to do 3 steps forward, we're going to go left, right, left, and we are going to freeze in the middle of that step. And we'd work that exercise a couple of times through, maybe in small groups or in pairs, however you're teaching this. And we basically say, okay, it's going to be forward march, and we're going to sound off left, right, freeze. And in this freeze, we are going to work on keeping our weight exactly centered between our heels so that our hips are really in between our feet. We're going to do that a couple of times just to get them familiar with that. And what this is doing, as we're going through and just getting them to freeze, 1, 2, freeze. If we wanted to go the other direction, maybe we do 2 steps forward, maybe we just go 1, freeze. We are teaching them that they must take a full-size step into the pivot. When we start to talk about flanks and columns, what are the gradable components? There's really not that many of them, but one of the biggest thing that we can do is set them up so that they're not taking a shorter step than maybe they should.
Because when you start to talk to people who have been drill instructors or drill sergeants, one of the things almost every single one of them says when they look at a pivot is 30 in, 30 out, or full step in, full step out. If you have a good judge, they're going to be looking for if you chop your step going into the pivot and whether or not you take a full step going out of the pivot.
So I think a lot of times when teams are like, they see really sharp groups and they kind of misunderstand the sharpness being more of a priority than the mechanics of the movement. So just stopping the weight in the middle is going to teach them, hey, this is the first step. We have to take a full-size step into this. The next thing we're going to do is teach them about weight distribution, which is kind of a weird thing. So all we're going to think about is our hips. And this time, instead of freezing, after our, let's say, 2 steps forward, we're going to go 1, freeze. We're next going to tell them, okay, now at this point, let all your weight go to the front foot. And see my hips move forward over the front heel. And if you can look at the back foot, it's more off the ground. The heel's further away than it was before. So we're going to do that. And we're just going to add that rolling forward of the weight so that our foot goes flat. So in 2 steps forward, it might be ready, go, 1, 2, roll. And we're just going to have them do that. We're going to have them feel what it feels like at a comfortable cadence just to roll into that step, because if they take a full-size step, then allow that weight to go forward. And if they're marching, good toe-over-toe technique, we can get into the next part of the pivot and break that down very easily. So take them through a couple of times, make sure that you can see the hips moving over the foot. And now we can start to talk about how to teach them the next piece of the puzzle. And that is kind of the mechanics of actually stepping to the left or to the right.
Now, when you teach this, ideally you would be inside. Because if you're anywhere where it's hot when you're outside, that's just a distraction.
And brains tend to float to try to fill the space, so we try to bring the space down.
Ideally, we'd like to be inside. We also like to be inside because inside generally has some sort of pattern or tiles or a gym where you can have 90-degree, basically, places. And so if you can't be inside and you're outside, you can either use dots or we like chalk, and all you need to do basically is draw a 90-degree angle.
Yeah, L shape, right?
Right? Or set your dots up at a 90-degree angle. Because in order to teach the actual mechanics of the pivot, we want to make sure that we have a marker that helps the people you're teaching learn. So, right now we're talking about going to the left. Okay, Matt talked about how we go into the pivot, so we step and we're rolled into the pivot. Now, when we talk about the actual mechanics of doing a pivot, there's really 3 parts. The first part, and this part's really easy, is your hips and your shoulders. And so have your new person stand as if they're already going to take their step into the pivot, and just have them turn their hips and their shoulders.
Yep, you have a full range of motion there, boom.
Right? Once they get that pretty comfortably, and this will start to work their balance so they can learn where to kind of place it in their feet. The second thing is have them turn their hips and their shoulders, and then also, and this is where your 90-degree line comes into place, take their back foot, which should be on the first part of your line, and place it when they turn their hips and their shoulders onto the second part of the line. So all they're going to do is, when you step, is step onto the other part of the line. This is really important because a lot of times your new people are going to want to just turn and then step.
And I think when you teach them traditionally, hey, pivot on the ball of the foot, take a step in the new direction, pivot on the ball of the foot, we want to do things symmetrically, meaning that when I pivot on the ball of this foot, I also am going to be more likely to pivot on this one, and that's where we get that swivelly swivel happening. We really want to break out of that first by telling them, put the foot down, move the foot in the new direction.
Yep, so have them shoulders, shoulders, hips, back foot, and then have them just step.
Go through that a couple of times, really get comfortable with it. You could flip it and go the other way.
Right. Now, when you go to teach your front foot and what that does, I would say have them go onto their toe. So when you did the pivot, you had them roll and they were all the way flat-footed. But when we're practicing doing the pivot, I would have them go all the way onto their toe and keep their heel off the ground. So then, when they go to take their step, they're going to turn their shoulders, their hips, take a step with their back foot, and then also use the toe that's on the ground to push forward. And the goal is when you take your step to keep the weight only on your toes. So there should be no weight basically from your, like the middle of your foot towards your heel.
This is really going to help us because we talked about 30 in, 30 out, full step in, full step out, 24 for our Air Force friends. This is going to help them not keep their weight back and only do the movement with their foot.
Because if you don't step forward onto your toe, what's going to happen? If you step and turn flat-footed, my height when I step is going to shrink because I'm trying to keep my weight back. When you push up onto your toe, that's where you're going to keep a level head. So if you push onto your toe, you stay level. When you leave the weight in your heel, you're going to shrink and then step out of it and then move back up.
So take them through that a couple of times, really be obvious. It's okay, here, weight's here, put the weight all the way to the front, now put the weight on the toe, now take your step and push onto your toe. A great way to have them check is if they go to that first step in the new direction, if they can't just bend their leg and pick up their foot, they have some weight lingering back here that we have to continue to encourage them to move in the new direction of travel, right? And that is kind of the essential component of what's actually happening in the pivot is we are coming up to the point with a full-size step. We are pivoting on the ball of the foot, pushing all the way in the new direction so we have that full-size step out of our pivot, which if we're in a column movement, we need to go to half steps. We've accomplished that goal. And so we just want to get them comfortable with that. We want to roll them through, and now we can start to combine it, right? We can start to combine these motions and really get into doing a pivot in time.
Right. Because this is really important because we're about to move to timing, and these things are important for you to understand because if your person that you are teaching is having trouble with timing, it's not probably because they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. It's probably because one of the things we talked about is not being done correctly.
So take your time here. Don't rush them through it. Again, this might take more than one practice, and that's okay. If they can go home and be like, this is how I turn corners now, and they have really no sharpness or snap about them, but they're doing the footwork correctly and their weight's going in the correct places, that's a mission accomplished, and we can come back to the timing. So the question is then, okay, let's talk about the timing. How do we teach them how to be sharp? Because I think that's the big question about every move, is how do I teach my team to be sharp? It's one thing to be able to walk and go, but obviously that's not going to be the outcome that we want in competition. We want that pop, that motion where the shoulders just snap in the new direction. So before we even talk about like doing that together, we have to stop and think about how we're thinking about it. We technically call this, we think about the approach to the movement. In our brain, we want to be thinking about the cadence left, right, like we're marching. And when we get to the pivot, we want to be thinking left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1. And we just want to count that out loud. So we might just say, we're going to say on ready, go, we're just going to sound off left, 1, 2, 3, 1. All right, so we can do that together. You'd have them do it. We go 1, 2, ready, go, left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1. As we do that, we want to obviously increase the snap and the intensity of how we're saying it. Left, 1, 2, 3, 1, right? Because this is training our brain to understand the timing of what's about to occur. Rep them through that, get them saying it, really sounding off, really being motivated, especially on the 1, 2, 3, 1, right? Should be like 1, 2, 3, 1, really punching and snappy like we'd want to do the pivot. When we go to put that mindset with our footwork, here's how this kind of breaks down. And you're gonna have to work in small groups, monitor, have them, verbally say left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1. Because what we're looking for is a pivot where the first part of the pivot happens on the 1, 2, 3, and the second part of the pivot happens on the 1. And we intentionally have a moment in there where nothing is occurring, where we're still in cadence, left, 1, 2, 3, 1, but where there's not any movement in the body. So when we're doing this, what we're trying to teach them is left, 1, 2, 3, 1. And when on the 1, 2, 3, our weight is on the front foot, our foot is flat on the ground, there's little weight on the toe of the back foot. And on 1, 2, 3, on 1, we're going back, and it would be 1, 2, 3, 1, right, left.
Right, because the thing that makes the pivot appear sharp is the lack of movement during the 1, 2, 3. Because it's going to really, when you do this, it's going to really make the pause feel more, because you're also not doing anything. You're only moving forward. So all you have to do is stop your weight, which is one of the hardest things to work on. So really work on being able to freeze there. But it's going to be that zero movement into the pivot that's going to create the look of sharpness.
So what we're going to do is we're going to rep it over and over with the vocal, or we're just going to rep the vocals, and then we're going to put it, and we're going to allow them to experiment and practice at a slower cadence. Left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1. And what does it feel like to go through that motion? And then what does it feel like to go through that motion and continue marching? But it's that 1, 2, 3, dividing that pause up into 3 spaces instead of just saying freeze, go, right? Dividing it up so that they have to count through the entire time of that pause before 1 pushes them in the new direction. That's going to give us the sharpness. And so the result would be, taking them through an exercise that might look like this. We're going to do 1, 2, we're going to do left, 1, 2, 3, 1 step. So we're going to do 2 steps going in the direction. We'd have them rep through something like this. It'd be like forward, march, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And having them work through that. We could go in the other direction. We could go left, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Here we go. Forward, march, left, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And we're working through that timing, counting it out loud, getting them to understand that there is that freeze in between the counts of the cadence that's going to give us that sharpness. Now, last piece of the puzzle, obviously check out the pivoting video on Drillpedia about our arm swing, just making sure that we're thinking about the arm swing.
Or not if you're
Or not if you're the Air Force. But either way, the arm swing is going to help us get that emphasis on count 1. It's either 1, 2, 3, and we're punching through on 1, or we're locking in 1, 2, 3, and we're pulling and punching really hard to get to that 1. That's going to help increase the sharpness as well. So then the question is, okay, we've taught them how to do the pivot. We've taught them how to understand the timing of the pivot. What can we do to help them practice and get ready to perform a pivot, especially in a column movement scenario, right?
And this piece is really important because this is probably one of the first things they're going to do that's going to require their whole body. And generally, if you're teaching freshmen, they're still learning to coordinate anyway. So you're really going to want to have tools to help them because they're probably going to be a little bit frustrated at this point. And so you want to, one, make sure you're telling them to be patient with themselves and continuing to be positive and give them positive encouragement as they go through this process, because it's going to take time for them to get good at this. But you also want some tools that you can kind of help them speed up the process with.
So one of the things that we can do, and one of the biggest issues that we see is once they get the mechanics down, we start to see a blending of 1, 2, 3, and we start to move through that pivot maybe a little bit early. And that's when people say, oh, they're rounding their pivots, or they're turning their shoulders, or they're blending, right?
Which they are doing.
Which is what's happening. So we want to get rid of that by encouraging them to 1, 2, 3, freeze exactly in place with their whole body before moving all their body on the first count in the new direction. So one of the things that we can do is really very simple. We can kind of help encourage them by placing someone on the outboard side of the pivot whose responsibility is to help stop that outboard shoulder from turning. They don't have to make contact at all, but the physical presence of somebody having them wait.
Let's see how many steps it is.
So are you going to go forward and over?
Yeah, I'm just going to see how many steps
Okay.
it is so I can, well, you be still.
Yeah.
So put your arm out. 1, 2, 3. So it's probably, yeah, it's probably this one.
So we're going to go to the outboard shoulder, and we can work in pairs, and we can have the commander here in a line of people going through, following just in a circle, kind of going around. We can have them walk up, and the way that this is going to work is going to be left, right, left, and on the 1, 2, 3, this is the 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3, we're going to hold the arm up. On 1, we're going to take the arm away. So it's going to be left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1, and we'll kind of show you what this looks like. Here we go. Ready, go, left, right, 1, 2, 3, 1. Now, if the person happens to turn early, if they happen to turn on, let's say, maybe 1 or 2 inside of that 1, 2, 3, it would wind up being something like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, and we're making contact here, but probably just the pure act of somebody being there is going to want us to cause us to hold those shoulders back, right? So we're not trying to shove or push anyone. We're just trying to give them a gauge of like, hey, don't turn the shoulders yet. 1, 2, 3, and then on 1, we go ahead, pull the arm away, and we move through in the new direction. We can do this going both ways. We could do this in an obstacle course, but again, something that we can do that's kind of more tactile in nature that would help people understand, especially that shoulder motion, once they understand what's going on with the feet.
Yep. And then honestly, the number one thing you can do, have them say it again and again and remind them. And if they're freshmen, they're probably going to be shy and they'll probably do it the first 1 or 2 times. And then as you go, they'll probably stop. Make sure you're saying it constantly, and then make sure they're saying it, because if they say it, even if they feel like it's not helping, it's going to help them, because if you say it, that means you're thinking it, which means your brain is learning it.
Yep. So always coming back to it. I mean, we always tell people, you know, go home, and when you're going down the aisle at the grocery store, when you're going to the refrigerator, left, right, left, 1, 2, 3, 1. That should be kind of in the back of their head for every corner that they turn for the rest of their life. And if you do your job and teach this well, it absolutely will, and they'll be like squaring their corners for the rest of their existence,
Yep.
which is our goal, right? So that's a little bit about how we would teach not only the pivoting aspect of it, but also the timing aspect of it, and also what we would do to help them start to learn that skill. And this is even before we put them in a formation and march them around and give them commands. We're not even worried about that yet. Have them master this in isolation, being able to do it with themselves or in a small group.
When you do put them in a formation, just real quick, don't have it be just the freshmen and all of you people who are teaching watch. Get in there with them, because the second best way to learn is by being around people who can do it, because you're going to want to blend in. And so if you do it with them, they're going to start to look like you also. So don't just have them do it and you watch. Make sure you have experienced people also doing it with them.
So hopefully this is helpful. Try it out. Let us know kind of how it goes and how your teaching process goes. Thanks for hanging with us, and hopefully this is very helpful for you.